Welcome to the Finding Your Path podcast. Hope today finds you well. My name is Stefan, and my goal with this podcast is to dig a little deeper and find what brings people joy and how they define it. Today, I have my longtime friend, Frankie Ferreira, on the show. Frankie actually works in the advertisement industry, so we discuss how corporations are tackling Black Lives Matter, of course, the COVID situation, how he broke his leg a little bit, and of course, how he finds and defines joy. Today we have Frankie Ferreira. Welcome, my friend. How is life? How is your day?
Hello. You know what? It was a good day. I spent the day basically learning how to use my crutches, figuring out how to live with an air cast, which is new to me. Um, Definitely a lot of learning.
You
A lot of
definitely.
learning I wish I didn't have to do, but you know what? There's progress there, and I can hobble around the house a lot faster now, so
Well,
I'm
that's
into
good.
it.
Is it your first time breaking your foot?
Yeah, it's the first time I've actually broken a bone where it actually impacts me at all. So other than that, it's been like shoulder blade and like toe, which is nothing.
Fair enough. Well, I guess one big question that we should probably get to is how are you dealing with this quarantine lockdown thing that's happening for the last 3 months now?
Yeah, we're in June now. I think it started sometime mid-March. Um, you know what? I think everybody is going to expect me to say that it's terrible and I hate it because I think that's what everybody thinks. And I do think that too. But you know what? I'm pretty privileged to have the lockdown experience that I have
Right up.
because you're very aware, but I work from home, right? So I got it made. I can work from home. I now live with three of my best friends, so I get my social fill for the week, to say the least. So
Awesome, man.
yeah,
I
for
guess
sure.
that's a pretty good segue into the big question that I have is how do you define joy?
How do I define joy? I think that's a very open term, joy, just because I don't think anybody follows one specific definition of it. But if I were to define it, I would see joy as a higher state of mind. I
Okay.
think of it in the way of like you can feel happy, right? And it's great to feel happy. But I think carrying over that happiness into your like everyday kind of state. Like if you are generally feeling happy, I would say yeah, you're feeling joyful because of all of the happiness around you.
Yeah. No, I 100% get that. That's for me that's changing your environment to something more positive, and then that'll eventually kind of like seep into you. You know what I mean? And then that instead of having your negative thoughts or whatever, like feeling down on yourself, you'll start feeling better about yourself just because the stuff around you is better. Like living with your three best friends, right? Like that must be awesome.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And like I was saying, and I think you're on the exact same page with me is it's normal to feel happiness in specific things, but you're right, having the environment that is promoting all of those kind of happy feelings is joyful. Like that's awesome. Like I feel really good about my environment right now. I feel good about work, you know. Obviously we're in quarantine, so that's pretty rough.
Yeah.
I wish everything was normal, but again, normal is relative.
So
But
we
yeah,
got into it a little bit before, but since like your quarantine experience has been honestly a pretty good one, do you feel like
yeah,
you have to
sure.
put on a mask and kind of like pretend to feel like worse than you actually are feeling?
100%. And actually, this is something that I was feeling at the very latest, even like last week, even a couple of days ago, right?
Hmm.
Um, because obviously there's people that are in terrible, terrible situations right now. They have no way to bring in money other than, if they qualify for CERB or this or that. And there's a lot of people having a really rough go of this quarantine right now. I feel too privileged, and like I feel like I shouldn't have, the job I have. I shouldn't be living with the people that I'm in. And I looked into it a bit, and I'm not sure if it's 100% what it is, but it's called imposter syndrome. Like, I don't
Okay.
feel like I should be the one in my situation. Like, I feel like I
Yeah.
don't deserve that, So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I
So that's
definitely get
been
that.
Yeah, that's been something, but you know what? I think just accepting all the happiness around me, like we were talking about, just
Mhm.
changed my state because I went from, not like happy on the outside, but wasn't really feeling it internally to like
Yeah.
actually, feeling joyful and happy about, everything that's going on. And I mean, I just broke my foot 2 days ago, and it's like, not really a huge deal. Everything else is pretty solid.
Right on, man. That's awesome. And jumping on imposter syndrome for a bit, where I feel like I've grown up in like a great environment, like in comparison to other people you hear like grow up in shitty households and all this stuff. And with my friends and my family, I feel like I've grown up with like peer care and support around me. But because of, I don't know, I couldn't tell you what it was. Maybe it's just me, but I felt like I was undeserving of it. I think honestly, what it was is I didn't do anything to earn that kind of kindness. I didn't have to work for it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah, and
broad, like big picture stuff, like I think that's kind of Western society's problem is you feel like you have to work and earn everything you get that is good in your life. If not, is it really good? You know?
yeah, I think almost the whole point of like, sorry, in our kind of culture, the way we see things is if let's for example, I have a car, right? Buying the car should be, that reward, but it's often having other people recognize how hard you worked for that car. That's the reward nowadays, instead of actually enjoying our accomplishments. We enjoy what people
Yeah.
think about, oh, he put so much work, that guy works, 80 hours a week for this great company, and that's the reward right now. But you're right, it's completely different than what we should be valuing.
Yeah. So speaking on that, would you find that society wise, there's a lack of joy?
Yeah, you know what? I think there totally is a lack of joy just in general, but I totally get it. I don't think it's really anybody's fault, and I think it's kind of something you alluded to earlier, which is the environment you're in. I remember once when all of this Corona COVID environment started happening, right? You had, for multiple different reasons, no reason to feel joyful. Everything
Right.
was legitimately dreadful. That's because you're so tapped into the news, you're tapped into the news from everything. If you're on Facebook, you're following the news basically.
Yeah.
If you're anywhere else on the internet, you're seeing headlines about why everything is going bad right now. So yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. And for me, honestly, after like 4 days, I stopped following the news because that's all my parents would talk about at the breakfast table. That's all my friends would talk about. That's all you'd hear, and
Yeah,
eventually, like, it starts scaring you, and starts getting to you a lot.
yeah. And I'm a perfect example of that. You've known me for, I would say, a fair share of years, and I'm usually not too bothered by all too much. Right
Right.
now, my biggest fear is bees and tornadoes. They always probably will be, but not. typically somebody to freak out about stuff like that we see in the news. But once I saw everything coming in and that, emergency orders were going to be enacted, in the next coming days, me, like almost everybody else, freaked out and took to like over purchasing, things without knowing anything. Like we
Yeah,
just had, all we knew is something was going wrong, and then as soon as that's all everybody sees, on Facebook, on the news, everything, the loudest voice in the room, you have to hear it, right? Something's going wrong.
yeah.
Everybody's going out to buy everything, and I was one of them. So yeah, it freaked me out.
No, for sure, man. I don't want to say it's a once in a lifetime thing because we've had pandemics in our life with SARS. I think SARS was the only one to touch down here, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe H1N1,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah,
never
I think SARS for sure.
but we never had these kind of um, restrictions put in place to stop the spread. So maybe I'm in the minority in thinking this, but when all the um, lockdown protocols started getting into place, I was kind of like, wow, like we actually learned from our mistake from SARS, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And you know what, too? I think it might have been even more immediate learning. Just seeing, because we almost had a full view of what this thing is with Wuhan, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they saw the destruction and how sick it made people in Wuhan. So I think people actually, for once, saw and then imagined and pictured what that would be like in their own backyard. And then as soon as it came in their backyard, they're like, okay, shut everything down.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny. We're here in Canada, but all I hear is how badly the states is messing up. And apparently Trump got information about this from January. You know,
Yeah,
he
that's
knew
brutal.
about Corona,
That's
and
brutal.
yeah, and I think one of the earlier this year or last year, I believe he got rid of the pandemic team. That got like bells ringing for conspiracy theorists, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, and that's a whole other side of this pandemic is the conspiracy theories that are coming out of it. And
That is
like, you
very
know
true.
what the terrible thing is it's like I don't know if I'm stuck inside enough, I don't have a reason to go out, so it's like maybe I'm looking at these too much. It's like some of them, I hate to say this, some of
They
them
have legs.
almost sound like they have legs, Yeah, exactly that. It's like I don't necessarily believe in them, but I totally see why other people would.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, and what he actually said is, I can't believe how transparent corporations are being now, in the sense that they're only in it for the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, in a sense, I'm thinking it's good because I feel like it'll open the eyes for a lot of people. But I'm gonna be frank, like a lot of people are undereducated through no fault of their own. Um, I just believe that the place where they're living, the area, is just underfunded for education. Talking about the states.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I don't that sounds terrible because we're supposed to be global citizens, but I don't know enough as to what's going on down there. I know it's terrible. I know everything that's going on is, you know, awful right now, but I don't know enough. I need to learn more about it, honestly.
Definitely. Something I did during this quarantine, especially when the Black Lives Matter riots started happening, is I started to educate myself on like the systematic racism, redlining, and all this stuff. And honestly, I think that came from wanting to tackle it from a different perspective, at least on Facebook. Like I'm gonna be the first to say, like I haven't really done anything. to support
Mhm.
that movement. But it's just in Facebook, I see so much emotion, and it's almost like piss and vinegar kind of thing, and which is great. Like that's what you need to get
Yeah.
attention, but also that's what's going to turn people away as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And again, I think things like social media, so Facebook, Twitter, all of that, they're big sounding boards. So once a movement starts, it can be very, very powerful, and especially when something is as powerful as the Black Lives Matter movement. For all the right reasons, it's powerful. Once something like that starts, that's all you're going to see, because that's what the movement is about, is drowning out all of that noise. And I think I said it earlier with uh, you know the bad news from the coronavirus being the loudest person in the room. That's all you hear about. Right now, something else is taking the place, and that's the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think the fact that it is so loud and that's all we're seeing right now, you're right, is kind of the movement that's needed right now. But it's definitely, for obvious reasons, not a great environment.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always felt during the course of our friendship you were definitely more optimistic than me, because the first thing I started like I'm thinking about is like I haven't heard like a peep about Black Lives Matter in a few days now, maybe going on maybe 4 or 5 days, and
Oh yeah.
I'm of the belief that like everything can be bandwagoned on and used as a way to sell and monetize.
Oh, for sure. I see what you're saying now. You're talking about actual corporations just, almost if they're feigning the belief to be on board to appeal to more people.
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
can I can definitely see that. And that's the thing is, and again, for context for anybody else listening, I'm kind of related to that field indirectly in terms of marketing decisions. And I can definitely see why somebody would want to be aligned with that right now. Because if you're not aligned with that and you don't make a statement, no matter what your actual beliefs are as a corporation, you are going to be ripped apart. So I genuinely hope that, the corporations that are jumping on that bandwagon will put the money where their mouths are in the future,
Mhm.
in terms of ensuring that they're fighting against, racism against blacks, racism in the future, everything. Uh, because if they don't, that's like blackmail for them right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the funny thing is I was listening to another podcast, Stay the Fire, with Dustin Kensrue, and one of his guests actually runs his own media agency,
Mm-hmm.
and he was saying how people are kind of starting to see through the veil when it comes to corporations. Like they all they do is talk the talk, but they don't necessarily walk the walk. Like they can show a commercial of like Kylie Jenner holding a Pepsi and like giving it to a cop or something. I think that was the campaign they tried to run. But then
Mm-hmm.
everyone was like, but what about all the human rights abuses that you're doing overseas?
Yeah,
It's a mess. It's a mess. And it's nice to see that rise in accountability for sure.
I totally get it. And you know what? This is slightly off topic, but I think this is genuinely a brand that is talking the talk and walking the walk right now. And it's everything's legal right now. It's raw rolling papers. Okay,
Raw rolling papers.
raw. And um, the founder of Raw Rolling Paper, his name is Josh Kesselman. Okay,
Okay.
he's a super rad dude just on the normal basis. He does a lot for a lot of people, employs people in like the right way in overseas. He also has a Raw Foundation where he's donating all the time, but that's beside the point. Once everything went down with George Floyd, he has made so many different moves to actually support the Black Lives Matters movement, like with his time, his money. You just see him sending screenshots. $10,000 here, $10,000 there for the bail funds. But you can tell he doesn't want it for the clout. He
Okay.
wants it to stimulate other people to donate. But the other thing is, it's not just he's supporting with his money, because any rich person can support with money and then who cares?
Right.
But he's actually going out to these protests himself, and he's starting protests.
Wow.
So it's insane to see somebody with, he probably wouldn't say power, but I would say influence at the very least,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah.
Using that, and you're right. People do see through it, and I think he's being genuine. And I don't really buy rolling papers, but I'll buy anything with Raw on it now just to support him because I know he's supporting all of these amazing causes.
100%. 100%. And this kind of leads me to something I've been thinking myself. Um, is I believe that now to become famous on social media or to have influence on social media, I think audiences value sincerity more, um,
Mm-hmm.
integrity more, transparency essentially, instead of trying to put on this wall, you know.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is, I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. Uh, Definitely something I would like to help with, because I think being yourself, being your best self, is the only way that you can help people and just be happy yourself, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that comes back to not necessarily the definition of joy, but actually being joyful. Like how is anybody going to help somebody else with feeling joy and being joyful if you are not yourself joyful? If you don't
Yeah,
know what that is, if you can't figure out to yourself, what is joy to me, how are you going to help somebody else feel that,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. There's a quote by Ram Dass that says we're all just walking each other home. And the reason I love that quote is it's just saying we're all here to help each other. We're all here to help each other find joy, find fulfillment. And I agree with you with, if you don't know what joy is for yourself, how are you supposed to find others or help others find
Mm-hmm.
joy? But
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people are like, I can't help myself, but I want to help other people. And
Mm-hmm.
and no matter what sacred text you look at, even recent studies, you'll
Mm-hmm.
find that helping other people makes you feel good.
For
The
sure.
the problem with that is it comes back to us, right? Because we aren't aware of the impact that we're having. We almost treat it as a one off.
Mm-hmm.
So we lose the high that it gave us. You know.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're totally right actually, because when you make somebody else feel happy, it makes you feel happy 100%. That's something that I know like I always actively do. I know if I'm like bummed out or something, I find myself going out of my way to, start like nice conversations with people because it makes me feel good seeing that they're happy
Mm-hmm.
and in turn makes me happy. But I think like I said, that big thing about for me internally making like feeling joyful is, you know, being around enough of those conversations and wanting to have positive conversations and wanting to be in that positive environment. yeah, that definitely helps me break through to joy. So you're totally right.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that intention matters. Um,
Hmm.
I I was thinking about it today. Like, let's say you're talking to a colleague at work, and you're pretending to be nice with them because you only have the intention of being his friend so you can move up in the company. And granted, you're not doing anything mean to him to move up, but you're being fake. And eventually, I believe that's going to be found out. And I don't necessarily think you're gonna feel the repercussions of that. Um, Even in like 2 months or a year, but like later down the road, like when you're 60 and you're taking stock
Hmm.
of your life, you're gonna think like, I should have been a more honest person. Like, what was the point of even lying there? You know, like he could have
Yeah,
turned out
for
to be a
sure.
great guy.
For sure, for sure. And I think, again, it's probably because it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. You might be in an elevated position in your life, and you kind of get that late life imposter syndrome where it's like, did I really earn this, or was I just, networking right? Whereas somebody else has, all the same opportunities, right? Was I just networking right? Was this good? Like, is that really networking, faking to be somebody's friend, right? Almost making opportunities when they weren't there, but like through deception. And it's like, did I really deserve this?
Yeah, and that's a very individual answer, right? It's different for everyone. Because
Yeah.
like if you deceive someone, but it's for the greater good, I would consider that a worthy deception, a noble
Mm.
deception.
Okay, so I think you know what that kind of goes to that. This is my thing that I've been going through the last year is understanding context too. So
Yes,
context is kind of king. So I'm sure we could definitely have scenarios where deception is a positive thing. It just depends on the context, right?
definitely 100%. And that's what I'm figuring out myself. Um, and it makes it a little hard, to pick a side. For example, like if my girlfriend brings an argument to me, or is like, "Can you believe the situation that's happening?" and she's so mad at it, I'm like, "Yeah, well, what about like the other side?" And then this is just how my mind works, and I'm just like, "Well, what about sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I go like, what about like the environment they're in? What about the socioeconomic issues in that area? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
like
There's
maybe I'm casting a wider net than I should. But I also believe that understanding is how you're going to change the world.
Yeah, totally. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's absolutely everything, right? Because your environment dictates your opportunities and dictates who you're around. So you're right. Yeah, if somebody comes up with an argument, knowing the other half, a lot of the times, I'm sure would diffuse that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, from the sounds of this conversation, like you sound to have like a pretty almost like limitless kind of view on life in terms of your potential and like what you can achieve in the world. Would I be right in assuming that?
Um, to a degree, right? Like I think anything is possible for anybody, right? You could work your butt off and do anything you want. You know, obviously, I'm not a fool. I understand that there are some terrible systematic procedures or elements in place that don't make that possible for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely awful. I wish everybody had the same opportunities, but generally speaking, if you don't at least try to do what you're wanting to do, it's never going to happen. So at the very least, like I have a goal for myself,
Okay.
If I really wanted to, I would say, yeah, you know what? I'm in my ideal career. But inside, I know there's more that I want. Am I happy and content right now? Sure, but have I hit my goal yet? Not necessarily, but I can definitely get there. Like, I know I can get there. I think that other people can definitely put themselves on the right path to do what they want and, kind of be limitless, but I don't think everything is off limit, at the same time.
Yeah, it's I I was saying this to my girlfriend. Um, you've heard the term like you create your environment.
Mhm.
I like from my studying and what I've been doing is I believe now it's like you choose your environment. And by that I mean like one, if you have the opportunity to leave an environment that you don't like and you're staying there, you're kind of choosing that for yourself.
Mm. I think in most cases you're right. I think like 90% of the cases you're totally right. As long as there's, nothing putting you in danger of leaving a scenario immediately, for sure. You can definitely choose where you want to be, who you want to be with, and, physically located where you are. You're totally right. I think the thing is for a lot of people is making that leap and making that change, and that uncertainty stops a lot of people from making changes.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot more in terms of pros and cons when I make a decision now.
Mm.
And at first, I remember being younger and thinking about the pros and cons of a situation and being like, "Oh, this is so robotic. This is like sapping the soul out of the decision." But
Mm-hmm.
now, looking at making a decision in that way, I'm kind of like, "No, this is helping me be good and stay good. And by doing this now, I'm gonna do good for the people around me, and then hopefully to a wider degree, to a greater extent."
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I think because I remember that too. I remember when I was little, physically writing out pros and cons lists.
Right, right.
But if you remember that, like think back to that, writing out that pros and cons list, and I remember having, maybe one, maybe two specific things as I'm writing that list where I'm like, okay, this is a pro, but it's a really big pro, like a monumental pro stacked up against all of these cons. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, as you're writing that out physically, you start realizing like, oh, I can't get rid of this one pro, or I can't miss out on this one pro because all of these cons. And then one of two things happens. You either think, you know what? There's two, look at all of them. I know this is one really big pro, but look at all these cons. And then I think that's you accepting that fear of change, you
Hmm.
know, or there's that obviously that danger. And then this goes both ways. If there's a really big pro, really big con, and
Right.
then I think, if you do make that leap of, making that big change, it's it shows that the person, isn't scared of the change and they're willing to actually move forward. But I
Yeah.
remember like with those little lists, I remember knowing as soon as I would see one point, I'm like, that's the deal breaker, and then leaping one of two ways.
It's true. It's true. And I think honestly, something that's helped me with that is taking ownership of my decisions. So like however it turns out, it's going to be fine because I'm the one that made the choice. No one did it for me. If it goes bad, it goes bad. Oh, if it goes good, it goes good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Ownership's a huge thing. You're right, because and I was guilty of this, was and still am, I'm sure, of if I choose to do something, nothing works out 100% of the time, right? Find yourself blaming other people, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
uh that's addictive because it feels like nothing you could do is wrong. it's all these unfortunate circumstances that you're making up in your head, and it's like that's the reason why I failed at this, not because I did this, and this, which were clearly not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and the thing with that is it's everything everything that happens in your life can be traced back to you, but with certain things it becomes harder to follow the breadcrumbs, you know, because there's just so much stuff that didn't involve you in that certain situation that it's hard to find the point that you actually made a decision, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. You can definitely lose track of something, right? Like you said, things, especially if you're making a change or you're accepting of something, things evolve, right? It comes to
Mm-hmm.
that point, I guess, where it's like once there's enough people or enough different opportunities involved, it's like, where does this, stop being my initial choice and where does it take on something new?
Yeah, yeah. I completely understand. And for me, that something that pops in my head when you said that is like Bruce Lee had a quote saying, "Be like water. When you pour water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When the waves crash against the rock, it becomes the rock," kind of thing. I feel like I butchered the last part, but it's essentially saying be adaptable, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you were talking about how like when does this eventually stop being something I wanted, I would say that you would have to take uh like a reanalysis of your environment and then adapt your goal to fit the environment. But a
Yeah,
lot of
I
people
think
don't
that
believe.
makes sense. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. It could be people being a little too, uh, you know, uh, attached to maybe their over, maybe a little overzealous goal, or not even overzealous, but being able to be flexible for sure. And
Exactly, because I was actually having this conversation with a friend, and it was about how Bill Gates found out about coding and programming when he was 12 years old. And then he's like,
mm,
from that day when I found coding and programming, I was doing it for 10 hours a day for 10 years. And that's how Microsoft essentially started. And then me and
yeah,
him were in just complete like bewilderment and awe, because like that's dedication. But something
mm,
else hit me during, and that's like that's his thing. That's his thing that gave him joy. And he was lucky enough to find it at 12 years old,
mm,
to find something that fulfills him. Whereas a lot of us, A, we don't find it till later on in life, or B,
mm,
we just need more stuff to fulfill us, you know?
so essentially, what you're saying is joy is feeling fulfilled.
Yes, that is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
I think that makes a lot of sense because even going back to, let's say, the things that I said made me feel, full of joy, and that's just, feeling fulfilled. Like I currently feel like I'm fulfilling my obligation to support myself right now. I feel socially fulfilled because I have people living with me.
Right.
My health, other than the stupid foot thing, I'm doing a-okay.
That's that's awesome, man. Um,
Yeah.
do you like read or anything to just like for fun or just to learn anything new?
You know what? I read, but not in the same manner that everybody thinks that they read. Like, sure, I'll pull out a book every once in a while and read a novel, but I prefer to read while I'm learning about something. So, for example, I know me and you've talked about this a bit earlier, or a bit, yeah, earlier in the week. But recently, I opened a trading account. So
Right
I've,
on.
I've been reading a lot about the market, and how to read the reading the market
Yeah,
and
yeah.
when to, invest into things. So I'm not necessarily pulling out a book about reading, about not a book about reading, a book about investing, but I'm reading from professionals in their field, usually through a device.
That's a great way to do it, man. That's how I do it as well. Um, it's like you learn it as you need it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the thing right now too is there's a lot of content online to digest, and it's right now kind of separating that content. Is it there to, take up your time? There's a lot of memes out there, there's a lot of great funny videos to watch out
Right.
there. But then it's also, are you enjoying that content to learn something? So I find myself often trying to understand what I'm watching in the moment. Am I watching this because it's fun? You're allowed to have fun. It's great. But
Obviously.
am I watching this to learn something? And then I know if I'm watching something to learn something, that makes me feel fulfilled because I feel happy that I'm gaining knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. Like going back to like you can do stuff for fun. Like the first half of the day, I was watching an anime. you know,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's great.
like I don't know about you, but it with certain shows, like I find myself thinking deep about the shows, like really
Yeah,
deep as I'm watching.
for sure. And I think that's why we enjoy those things. Like there's a lot of topical things and mindless things, but enjoying something and like becoming invested in it, I'd say that's, becoming invested in if it's the
Yeah.
character or the storyline. That's I think that's a different thing. Totally valid and totally real,
Hmm.
but that's a nice feeling too. Is like understanding uh, you know that show or that character or getting in their element is cool.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a sense of interconnectedness, which is something that I believe in. Everything is connected. So, for example, like when I was watching that anime, I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
he was going through something in the show. I'm like, oh, that totally fixed that problem I was having in my life, and like now I know how to tackle that problem. Um, and I think it all comes down to how conscious you are, and that word is very vague and stuff, but when I say consciousness, I mean
Mm-hmm.
awareness, like how aware you are of what's happening in the show, what information you can take away from what's happening around you.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess that makes a lot of sense too because uh, you're just taking in that knowledge, but in that scenario, you're taking on the knowledge of seeing somebody else in the situation. If it's real, if it's fictional, you're still seeing that scenario come out in usually a somewhat realistic fashion. Even though this is anime, but
Yeah,
you can still learn from somebody else's scenario, even though if they're real or fake. I think.
yeah, yeah. And honestly, thinking about like TV shows, music, even to a certain extent, um, we're consumers of that. We don't create it, but I think a lot of times we miss the message that they're trying to um, portray in their art. And thinking about it now, I would say we're kind of doing a disservice to the artist or the musician by not trying to think deeper.
For sure. And I totally agree, but I also think that sometimes it's just not what people want to hear in that moment, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but I think it has to be relatable. Somebody's got to want to listen. So it's all about going back and saying, thinking like, you know what, this song speaks to me because it makes me feel something, right?
Right.
And I think people when they feel that thing, and we go back to, relating about it and actually learning, that's great. But I don't know if everybody can put themselves in other people's shoes to feel something that they don't. I think that's another state you have to be in. I think you have to be very open to get that.
Definitely. You have to be a lot more sensitive to the stuff that's happening around you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've started, in terms of the word sensitive, I've started to look at it at a different light. Because when I used to hear sensitive growing up, even now, people are like, oh, I'm way too sensitive. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's a good thing. That means you're receptive to the stuff that's happening. The
Yeah.
the bad thing is I they don't know what to do with it, and they get overwhelmed by it. So instead of
Yeah.
saying I'm too sensitive about a certain situation or a topic, I do my best to say I'm too fragile, because
Yeah.
yeah, like sometimes it's just taking weight, like the littlest thing can just break you. And like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
how would you
I
define that? Sorry, like fragility.
I think you're making a lot of sense to me there. What I would say is, you know, being sensitive is, on the same lines of being compassionate too.
Yes.
Because being able to put yourself in somebody else's scenario and kind of really feel for them,
Hmm.
I would say is, you're going on the line of sensitive, right? You can feel what they're feeling and you understand why. But I think people really need to take a step back and see if they can feel like empathetic towards somebody and compassionate and, understand, really understand as a scenario they're in. Because I feel like if somebody's in a bad place and you don't understand why, it's easy to say, you know what, you're being too sensitive right now. But if you are able to kind of put yourself in their shoes and really understand what's going on with them, you're going to feel that sensitivity and you're going to understand why it's making them upset, and that makes you upset.
Right.
So I think sensitivity and fragility are almost separate things. I think fragility is when you don't necessarily understand a scenario, but you know you should be upset. So you might be getting upset for the wrong reasons, and that seems fragile.
Interesting. Yeah. For me, fragility. I'm going to be talking more in a almost like scientific way, not in a more physical way.
Mm.
That's better. That's a better way to say it. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, being sensitive is taking in all this information that you're receiving from just sitting down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then fragility would be your tendency to get overwhelmed by that information. Or like some people will be be bordering on a panic attack just sitting in silence.
For sure. For sure. And I think it's kind of touching on what you were saying. And I just want to see if I'm kind of grasping that or if this is something different. It's almost taking in that all that information at once and being like overwhelmed.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Cool.
And,
Well,
and
I'm
like
not
that.
cool, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. Um, it's almost like people are afraid to admit that they're fragile or they need help in something, and that in itself is it kind of circles back to what we were saying before, is like owning up to your choices. I'm not saying that they're choosing to be fragile. I'm just saying
Mm.
like it is what it is. Like in a better world, you wouldn't be bordering on a breakdown with your own thoughts. But unfortunately, we do not live in that world, or you don't live in that world, and you do have that. So what are you going to do to fix it?
Got to adapt.
Exactly. And I remember one time I was walking home from filming a video, and I said to myself, "Well, it is what it is." But I'm like, no, there's more to that. And then I went, it is what it is. Now what am I going to do about it? And to me, what that means is like, okay, you've taken in the scenario, the situation around you. You have enough information to make a call. Now, what are you
Mm-hmm.
going to do?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really good call, actually. It's taking that scenario you've been dealt or you're in, and what to do next that can make this more positive. You know, what's the game plan? How do I feel better? And I think recognizing that is step one of everything. Recognizing that you do feel like garbage and that other people are in a better spot. Sure. How do I get to that spot? What environment that I'm in what can I affect and change to make it more positive?
Yeah, yeah. And something with that is, funny enough, I got this idea from watching the anime. We're
Mm-hmm.
just like we look at our environment as our enemy. What
Mm-hmm.
For myself, what I've started to do is like look at my environment as my teacher, and that's made a world
Mm-hmm.
of difference.
For sure, I definitely see that. And as opposed to like your environment being your enemy, your environment is almost who you are at the end of the day. So if somebody were to ask me who are you? Like tell me about yourself. I'd be describing my environment a lot, I work, I do this. X is my partner. I have this as a dog and I live here. Those are all things I control. You know what I mean? Those are all environmental things. Like I keep my partner around. They're pretty neat. I keep my dog. I continue to do the work that I do because I enjoy it. And I live where I live because it's filled with people that are great people. So it's like those are environmental things that I feel define me right now quite a bit. And it's like I have control of those things right now. And I
Right.
know there's not always the scenario where you can control everything in your environment. That would be ridiculous for me to say. But I know that when somebody asks me to tell me about, myself, I end up explaining environmental things like all of that.
Yeah, yeah, and me too. Me too, honestly. And I haven't had a job in a bit, in a bit. So when people ask me like, "What are you up to?" and I'm like, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can." They're like, "Oh, that's nice," and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, "Oh God, I'm such a disappointment." But
Wait,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was about to say, like, sure, you can feel that way and you're allowed to feel that way, but in reality, like, you are learning so much and you're working on yourself so much. You know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah,
that's that's fulfilling for you, and it should be.
thank you, man. I appreciate it, and yeah. Before I let you go, I have one more question for you. All right.
For sure.
So, what's one thing you do to recenter yourself? To like maybe when you're not feeling your best, maybe light that little spark of joy to to help.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a couple different things. Again, it's contextual, depending on what's putting me in that place. For me, it's typically, one of two things that, not one of two things, like it's so black and white, but for example, I like to think of myself as like running on some sort of battery, some sort of social battery. And that's
Okay.
usually what puts me either over and I'm like a little too high strung or, running a little empty. And it's like, you know what? I need people around me. I need people that love me and care for me and that I can talk to and have fun. That's typically it. So it's like a lot of the times if I'm typically, if it's like too much, you know, I live with three amazing guys. They're super high energy. They're amazing to be around. But we all get to that point sometimes where it's like, okay, I just need to veg out, have some time to my own thoughts. So I typically will come up and I'll do that. I'll veg. I'll do the things that I want to do. If it's, ingesting some content online, it's
Right.
ingesting content online. If it's taking a nap, it's taking a nap, but separating myself and allowing myself to, drain a bit before I can go put myself in those kinds of usually uplifting, but like it takes a toll on you kind of scenarios. Or if it's
Right.
I'm working all day at my computer while nobody's home and I'm like, I'm bummed out. It's usually me needing to be stimulated. I need to talk with people. So I'll reach out. And like I said earlier, if I'm feeling particularly off, I'll reach out to people and just let them know that I care about them. I'll let them know that they're doing great, assuming they are doing great. But
Yeah.
usually they're doing great. Usually they're
Yeah.
doing great. So I'll let them know that because I know that if I'm feeling like that, somebody else could be feeling like that. And getting them out of that, because I know that if I were to be talking to somebody and we'd be talking about, all the great things I'm doing right now or all the great things that are around me right now, I would feel great. So just like we talked about earlier, that I totally glossed over, making other people feel, loved and other people feeling like they have a social purpose at the very least makes me feel good and gets me back to that point where I'm, leveled out and I'm usually happy. And again, there's always scenarios where things are really off balance and it's, things are not doing well and it's not going to be a quick fix. I think that's a longer road to get down, but what usually helps me is putting everything into perspective, putting
Awesome.
things, yeah, really understanding. You know, it's not terrible. I'm not, the situation sucks right now, but this is what I need to do to get out of it, and it's just getting around to taking those steps to make things better, and that's not always, an immediate thing. Sometimes you need to rest, you need to really think on it. But once you start taking those steps, then yeah, you can definitely recenter yourself from an interesting place for sure.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it sounds like you're striking up a really good balance of like taking time for yourself, but also engaging with your environment, you know?
For sure. And you know what? I say this now, and in a month I might be in a terrible place, but right now things are good, and just being able to kind of see the positivity, I hope, will kind of keep me in that place
Okay.
because I think, like I mentioned before, as long as you can put things into perspective and as long as things are going well enough that you're like, okay, you know what? This is fine. Everything's fine. I can work with this.
Yeah.
Taking those steps to get yourself feeling better is huge. So if it is, reaching out to people or relaxing, actually relaxing, or going out and getting stimulated, it's just understanding what you need to get there.
Oh, okay. Right on. I definitely understand, man. Well, man, it was great talking to you. Thank you for being my guinea pig for this.
Always good, and anytime, anytime. Well, I can ramble for another, 40, 50 minutes anytime.
Awesome, brother. Well, who knows? I might hit you up in 2 weeks' time.
Sounds good, my dude.
All right. Have a good night, my man. Bye.
You too. Bye.